Good morning and happy Tuesday, guys. I'm here this week to talk about senior pets because November is Adopt a Senior Pet Month, and the statistics about them in the shelters makes me really sad. So I thought I'd share some of it with you, not to make you sad too, but just so you're aware of how they're treated and how they experience the shelters in there. So first of all, their adoption rate is less than half of younger dogs. They actually only have a 25% adoption rate, while younger dogs have over 60%, but they wait 4 times longer to get adopted. So if they do get adopted, they have to wait a really long time, and oftentimes they get sick before they get adopted just because they've been sitting there waiting for so long. Their return to owner rate, meaning if they get picked up by animal control or something, or found and taken to the shelter, their return to owner rate is actually higher because they had a few reasons why. The first is that people are more concerned they can't make it overnight, so they send out search parties and everything to try and find the dog, and typically the dogs are wearing tags, or they have somebody in the neighborhood knows them because they've been around so long, or their medical history is known by somebody, and when they see them, they recognize the dog. But their return to owner rate is almost 50%, which is absolutely amazing if they're sent to the shelter, while for younger dogs, it's only about 23%. So if you do end up losing your dog, or they go missing, or there's a natural disaster, and you go to your shelter, there's not a very great chance that you're going to find your dog, especially if they don't have IDs. So do make sure that they're wearing their collar with their tags and they are microchipped. I know the microchips move sometimes, but it gives your dog a better chance of being returned to you. The live release rate, and I'm not entirely sure what this means, but what I'm guessing is that once they get released, they live for quite a while. But the live release rate for senior dogs is just over 50%. But for younger dogs, it's over 75%, meaning that they go to homes that are good for them and they can look after them and afford to care for them and get them exercise and things like that. But senior dogs often don't get that chance. But what's really lovely is that typically senior dogs are adopted by seniors, and because they don't want a high energy dog to look after, it gives them the same companionship, but without all of the extra energy and effort. There are quite a few benefits to adopting a senior dog over a younger dog. The first is that they're calmer. When you have a puppy, they jump on everything. They're not house trained at all. And you know what you're getting because the dog has set in their personality, usually. And younger dogs, anything that happens to them can shape what kind of dog they become. But because senior dogs, any senior dog is considered a dog that is 7 years or older, regardless of what breed they are. So for some dogs, for example, Australian Shepherds, 7 is mid-age. It's not senior because they live to about 14. So just because the dog says senior when you're looking at them in the shelter doesn't necessarily mean that they're really, really old and they're about to die. Something else to consider. But they're easy for newbies because you don't have to potty train them. They're likely already leash trained and they're very mellow. You don't have to teach them not to jump on things and teach them not to chew on things and all of that. You typically know if they come with medical issues, you know already, and they're probably not going to develop more. You know what their behavior is like. They don't need as much food or exercise as young ones. Typically, they need less, I believe it's less calories because their digestion is slower, so they actually need less food, which is nice. But again, it depends on the breed because a large breed dog at 7, that would be considered more senior, but a small dog at 7, that's not really that old. because sometimes the smaller dogs, if they're really healthy, they live to about 16. So that's not actually a senior, just considered senior when they pass 7 years old. Something to consider, because I don't think Kaya will ever act like a senior until she gets probably 10 or over, just because of her breed. But definitely something to consider. Typically when seniors get surrendered to the shelter, other than being lost, they get returned because their owner passed away, which is devastating to them. And then they end up sitting in the shelter for a really long time, and some of them don't get adopted. But they didn't actually do anything wrong. And some of the dogs at the shelter have done something wrong and some of them haven't, but ultimately it depends on which animal you connect with. Sometimes the owner or the family had to move, and they moved somewhere that the pet wasn't allowed to go, which this one kind of bothers me, because once you make the commitment to adopt or own a pet, it's a lifetime commitment. It's not when it's convenient for you, it's all the time. And yes, sometimes you can't give them the care they deserve, but rehoming them to another family rather than dropping them at the shelter is almost always a better option. Third, you had a baby. The new family has a baby, and either they don't have time to look after the dog now, or they're afraid the dog's going to do something to the baby, and instead of training the dog, they just give it to the shelter. And I actually read a post about all the reasons that animals get returned to the shelter, and it absolutely broke my heart that people would just, no, it doesn't work for me anymore, so here you go. Unless it's a life-threatening, you're in the hospital type thing, your family can look after the animal. But it just, people make it seem so easy to detach, and I know people wouldn't do that to their kids. And for a lot of pet owners, their animals are considered their family and their kids, and they would never, ever just give them away. If something ever happened to me, if I died, my family would look after Kaya. But if something happened to my entire family, I have people that would take her and watch her and look after her, because I have that in place. So no matter what happens, Kaya's looked after. Because if I ever wrote a will, I would leave enough money in it so that she would be fed. She would still have her group walks, probably up it to twice a week, depending on who I gave her to. And make sure she had that money so that she's looked after and she doesn't have to worry about it. Her food's paid for, everything's good. Because that's just my dog mom approach, I guess. Sometimes if people lose their jobs, they get depressed, or they can't afford to look after the dog anymore, so they take it to the shelter, which I understand. But again, your dog is your family and your cat is your family, and even if it's a smaller animal like a guinea pig, they're really not that expensive, the smaller ones. Like, I've had goldfish, guinea pigs, lizards, birds, and not nearly as expensive as the dog. I was talking to my friend last night, and I spend more on Kaya's food every month and her supplements than I do on my own. But her health is really important to me, and her quality of life is really important to me. But dogs and cats get returned to the shelter because people develop allergies, or they have kids with allergies. So they adopt the dog thinking, oh, this will be a great gift for my kids. But then one of the kids is allergic to the dog, so they take the dog back. Typically, when you adopt a dog from a shelter, you have the chance to take the family to meet the dog first. My suggestion is to meet them several times before you take them home, because then you get a chance to see how your kids react around them, how people in your family react around them, and if you have allergies, you'll know before you take the dog home. I met Kaya 2-3 times before I took her home, and she was little at the time, but I've had cat allergies, for a while when I was a kid, and I was hoping I wasn't going to be allergic to her because she does have a lot of hair, but after playing with her inside and outside, she's perfectly fine, not allergic to her at all. and we brought her home. But again, one of the other reasons is that someone in the family, the main caretaker, has less time to look after the animal. So for example, they get a new job that takes more time, or their hours increase, or they have a sick family member and they have to go back and forth from the hospital quite a few times a week and they can't look after the animal. There are always alternatives if something like that happens, and it's short term. If it's long term, then that's a problem. But if it's short term, you can have your family check in. You can have one of your neighbors walk your animal for you, or feed your cat, or change the litter box, or something like that. A lot of times, if the neighbors have kids, that's something kind of to give them a little responsibility if you want to pay them for it, or give them something else for it. But your community is there for you. And having that network of people that you can call on when something happens is really, really important, especially when you have pets or kids. And don't forget about that. Typically, the two main reasons that people do not adopt senior pets is because they're afraid that they're going to die right away, which if the dog is a large breed dog and it's a senior, meaning over 7, sometimes they only live to 8 to 10 years. So that is something to consider. But the main concern is that the vet bills are going to be expensive, because the older the dog is, the more likelihood they're going to have health problems. And while this is true, if you feed them properly, exercise them properly, unless there's a congenital disease, like a heart condition or a bone deformity or something like that, or they're blind, then it's manageable. And Kaya goes to her vet once a year for her checkup and her titer test. Otherwise, I do the best that I can to look after her. When she has an upset stomach, I do acupressure on her. When she has a traumatic experience with something, like the incident, I believe I've talked about it before, when she got prey circled by 2 white mastiffs in the forest, we did Reiki and flower essences for that to kind of walk her through it. And traumatic car experiences, things like that. She just did her first road trip to Guelph last night. We drove out midday, spent a couple hours there, and then drove back in the car. She's not a huge fan of the car, and I got her a car harness, but not a huge fan of that yet either. But I gave her Rescue Remedy before we got in the car, so she was a little more relaxed. And we took a break halfway so she could kind of walk around, go pee, and then we got back in. But had a treat for her when she got home, so all the nervous energy could be focused on that, and it kind of soothed her, and she passed out for the rest of the night. But actually, the video we're going to talk about next week is basic preventable diseases and conditions when you look after your pet properly, which is going to be interesting because I already have half a page and I haven't actually looked up anything yet. These are just things that I know happen. But ultimately, your vet bills, if you look after your pet's health, should be fairly minimal. While I know vaccines are fairly cheap compared to titer testing, titer testing is about $300 a year. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you think about the vaccines that are, $15, $20 a vaccine, it's definitely a big price difference. But I would much rather have my dog's blood tested to see if she needs it before injecting chemicals into her body. Just a personal preference here. But I hope you're out enjoying the snow. And if you do decide to adopt a senior pet this month, you do get a discount. There is a code on I believe it's a November 1st holidays post. Go check the code. I think it's Senior Love, all caps. If you tell me the code while you're booking your appointment for your senior pet that you adopted, you get a discount. Because I like senior pets and they're absolutely adorable. And I want to do everything that I can to help you manage their health problems and their behavioral issues if they have any. So have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you next week to talk about preventable diseases and conditions.